What's good, everybody? Welcome back to the Cloud Slayer channel. Hope you guys are doing well. Today, we're going to be looking at 5 great Viking deaths and what they tell us about the Viking mindset. I find this one interesting because, like most tribes back then, war was a part of life. You know what I mean? It was more so that it was like passed down from people's kids, you know what I mean? Like warrior type people. Native Americans, Vikings, so on and so forth. They go on to conquer the world, or they evolve in different ways and conquer it different ways. So I hope you guys enjoy this one. If you guys like this, hit that like and subscribe button, please. We're going to be watching Epic History TV, so I'm going to put their link down into the description. If you like this video, jump over there, hit the sub and hit the like for these guys. We'll see what kind of video this is. The Vikings and their descendants speak for themselves. Their many voices express a spirit which is like no other on earth.
AD 793. Raiders appear without warning off England's east coast. They land at Lindisfarne, known as Holy Island, where they slaughter monks, steal treasure and holy relics, then vanish back across the dark sea.
These guys would, kind of like dine and dash, it seems like.
It was Western Europe's first traumatic encounter with the Vikings. For 3 centuries, these pagan pirates from Scandinavia terrorized Europe, raiding, extorting, enslaving, and ultimately conquering.
That's crazy. Look how far they would spread out and hit different places.
They roamed deep into Russia and the Mediterranean, even daring to attack what they called Miklagard, the great city Constantinople. Viking longships and a mastery of seamanship and navigation gave them the ability to strike at will, with the element of surprise. But their enemies, including Anglo-Saxons and Franks, themselves belonged to proud warrior cultures. Was there something more that gave the Vikings their lethal edge? Professor Tom Shippey is an expert in Viking history and
well, they'd be more primed for it if they're going around as a everyday life thing, but if they're all engaged in all those battles, maybe just mindset, you know what I mean? It could be the winners, like they say, winners write the history. Who knows how it was going for those guys leading up to that, unless if you had some kind of like history going down, or like the people passed down that knowledge from generation to generation, kind of like you hear Native Americans tell certain stories because they're not really filled in certain parts of history and, like books and stuff like that. For now, I guess.
Medieval literature. He believes their success can be attributed in part to a unique mindset. A mindset revealed in the Vikings' own sagas.
We have a great many sagas written in the Vikings' own language, which is Old Norse. There's the famous sagas of Icelanders, but there's also Konungasögur, that's sagas of kings. There's Fornaldarsögur, sagas of old times. These are looked on with suspicion these days because they were written hundreds of years later, mostly in far-off Iceland. And people say, oh, well, you can't rely on those for history. They're fiction. Well, actually, a lot of it is fiction, and some of it's fairy tale, and you can pick that out quite easily.
Right, like chopping like 100 dudes' heads off with one sword slash, you know what I mean? Some shit like that.
But a lot of it isn't fiction. I think it's based on family memories, and people who can't read and write often have good memories, and they take memories seriously, and they pass them on.
Right. Maybe the family didn't learn how to read and write, but Grandpa kept telling a story every day, and everybody remembered it, and they would tell their kids, stuff like that, in the way that they remember it. And anyways, so like if I tell a story of my dad, he'd seem like some great dude, you know what I mean? So, I mean, if they were engaged in war times, and especially if they've seen these battles in like persons, who knows?
Leaving the fact and fiction question aside, they do all express, I think, a very characteristic and consistent attitude, which I call the Viking mindset. And that's really quite distinctive. Two of the distinctive things about it are the fascination with scenes of death, with famous death songs, with famous last stands, all that kind of thing. And the other is the very characteristic sense of humour, which I call, I'm afraid, it's not good sense of humour, it's bad sense of humour. It's the kind of humour which is really rather cruel or grim. And we see...
Right, like people did torture for some people's kinks and shit, you know, it's just, for them was great, but to people of today's standards, it's gruesome, you know. I guess that depends on where you live at in the world, so.
See quite a lot of it.
We'll look at 5 famous death scenes from the Old Norse sagas to see what they can tell us about the Viking mindset. This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream, home to thousands of online documentaries about science, technology, the natural world, and history. Their history section has hundreds of titles covering everything from early man and prehistory to the world wars and beyond. Our particular recommendation is The Nile, 5,000 Years of History, presented by British broadcaster and author Bettany Hughes. It's an immersive, engaging and beautifully filmed journey along the Nile, exploring its crucial role in Egypt's glorious past. CuriosityStream features many award-winning exclusives and originals, and all its content can be streamed to any device, so you can watch at any time, anywhere. For a limited time, you can sign up on your smart TV using the code EPICHISTORY to get 40% off an annual subscription. That's just $12 for a year's access to an incredible range of documentaries. You can also...
That's pretty cool. I mean, this is obviously their paid promotion type stuff, but you know, it's still cool to see some of those because, you know, very informative, especially if you're going down like a rabbit hole of history or various things like that.
So sign up using the link in our video description. Thanks to CuriosityStream for sponsoring this video.
CuriosityStream.
Many tales are told of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok. His own saga says he was the son of a Swedish king and slew a dragon, but that when he sailed to England seeking further...
That's crazy. Slew a dragon. We still haven't found any bones, so...
...their fame and riches, he was shipwrecked off the coast of Northumbria. He was taken...
Unless if it was like a sea serpent or something like that, I suppose.
...prisoner by its Christian king, Ella, who decided to inflict a terrible death on the famous Viking. He had him thrown into a pit of venomous snakes. As he faced death, Ragnar called out to the king.
The famous line from the death of Ragnar is Gnithia mundu grisir ef galtar hag vissi. The piggies would grunt if they knew how the old boar died. The word Gnithia, it means grunt, but it also kind of sounds like grunt. And I think you could actually translate it, go oink oink. The piggies would go oink.
Go oink oink, bitch.
Oink, if they knew how the old boar died. It's a joke. And the joke is actually on King Ella, because there's this barnyard vocabulary, piggies and oink, but what it means is, my sons are gonna come, and what they do to you won't bear thinking about. It's a threat. The funny thing is, although it's a late saga, this story about the piggies was known earlier, because it was actually quoted by a Latin chronicler. He'd heard about
So whoever their translator was should fire him. Just kidding. You won't make that mistake again.
piggies. He got the phrase right, he just didn't understand what it meant. He thought Ragnar was saying, if my sons knew about this, they'd come and rescue me. But he didn't. He wasn't hoping to rescue, he knew he hadn't got any hope. He was saying, my sons, when they hear about this...
Well, maybe he thought that because he was like, nobody would dare to challenge me type bullshit, you know? Like you see in movies.
then they'll avenge me. And of course they did.
Ragnar's death in a snake pit is almost certainly invented, but his sons, the piggies, were very real. In 865, the Ragnarssons landed in England with a great army, rampaging across East Anglia and Northumbria and killing King Ella. Is there any link between these historical events and the saga tale of Ragnar's death?
Probably. I'm sure word got back to him, you know, especially if there was people selling information.
England was invaded by men who were very early on identified as the Ragnarssons. And my suggestion would be that the whole story of Ragnar's death in the snake pit was made up later on in order to motivate the invasion of England. Why did the Ragnarssons invade England? They did it to take vengeance for their...
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they could do that at, back at those times, you know, especially just rally the troops type stuff and be like, hey man, yeah, this is what they did. There's some gruesome motherfuckers. Let's go kill them. You know what I mean?
father. And so you make up a story about the death of the father and the way that the vengeance was motivated.
Denmark, early 6th
According to
century.
legend, Rolf Kraki was a great Danish king of the 6th century, a Danish King Arthur. His great hall stood near Lera, where he entertained a famous band of champions. But many sought his throne. His own cousin, Hjörvarthr, made a surprise dawn attack on the king's hall. After a desperate last stand, Rolf lay dead, surrounded by his champions. Only one man survived. Vögr, the weakest man in Hrolf's court. He'd been the butt of all jokes, even when he'd sworn to avenge Hrolf's death. Now he was hauled before the new king, Hjörvarthr.
Rolf is dead, and all his champions are dead as well. That's the right thing to do, except Vögr, who is dragged out of a pile of bodies. And for some reason, Hjörvarthr thinks it would be a good idea to get a pledge of allegiance from Rolf's last surviving champion. So they get Vögr, and he is hauled up, asked to swear allegiance to Hjörvarthr, and Hjörvarthr gives him his sword to swear allegiance on. Bad idea. Vögr picks it up, runs Hjörvarthr through. That's the end of Hjörvarthr and the Skilding dynasty. And of course, Vögr is immediately killed. But he has fulfilled his vow. So it's
He's like, fuck it, I ain't no bitch. I'm gonna kill this dude, man.
another example, really, of the Viking love of, shall we say, wit, of being able to turn the tables in a funny kind of way. Once again,
I will now never sell my people out. That's what he said, huh?
Ragnar's joke was on King Ella, and Vögr's joke is on King Hjörvarthr. Very funny, in a sort of way.
Legends about King Hrolf come from a tumultuous period of Europe's history, traditionally known as the Dark Ages. But recent discoveries suggest the tales of King Hrolf have a basis in fact.
King Hrolf is the Danish King Arthur. They lived at about the same time in the early 6th century. For a long time, the story of King Hrolf was regarded rather like the story of King Arthur, you know, it couldn't be true. But then the archaeologists, alerted by a chance discovery, started looking at the traditional site of King Hrolf's court, which is now the small village of Lera in Denmark. And much to their surprise, they discovered the site of one enormous hall after another. I think they have now found 6 of them, all through the Viking
That's crazy. Old style graves, tombstones.
and pre-Viking era. So that part of the story, at least,
You know, it took a few people to carry those stones too.
was true. Lera, once upon a time Hlaethraborg, really was a major power center in the early Viking period.
The Jomsvikings were a legendary group of Viking mercenaries, picked men bound by a code of honor. According to Old Norse sagas, they had a fortified base on the Baltic coast at Jomsborg. In 986, they were recruited by the King of Denmark to subjugate Jarl Håkon of Lauder. But at Hjörungavarg, they suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Jarl Håkon and his son Jarl Eirik. Vikings rarely offered or expected mercy. After the battle, the Jomsviking prisoners were lined up for execution.
The beheading started, and the Jomsvikings, who had a code of their own,
they had to send a message, you know. Take their heads, put them on spikes, do whatever.
Which forbade them to express fear at any point. One of them, for instance, said he would not kneel down to be beheaded. He insisted on standing up and being beheaded from the front so that people could see that he did not flinch from the blow. One guy does kneel down to be beheaded, and he says, I'm a bit worried about my hair. I don't want to get blood on it. Could somebody very kindly take my hair and pull it over my head, and then the beheading can go on?
It's crazy that they listened to him instead of shut up. But they did. They were honorable men, I suppose. That's pretty cool.
But as the axe falls, he jerks his head back, and the falling axe cuts off the hands of the man who's been...
Oh, that dude's crazy, man.
...holding his hair. Well, that's bad sense of humor for you. What a joke. Everybody laughs like nobody's business. In particular, actually, Jarl
All right, I take that back. They were just dumb.
Eirik, who thinks he's never seen anything so funny in all his life. It was such a good joke, he says, well, we'll let you off.
We're not gonna kill you, bro.
And the Jomsviking very properly says, can't accept that unless you let all the others off too. So the other Jomsvikings are then all spared. Well, you know, obviously complete fiction. No, can't believe a word of it.
That does make sense. They would have just murked those dudes.
Yeah, about 15 miles away in that direction from where we're standing, just recently they were digging for a new road, and they came upon a pile of skeletons, about 50 odd, and a separate pile of skulls. All the skeletons had been beheaded, and analysis showed they were all male, they were mostly young, and they were all Scandinavians.
Damn, that's crazy. Just lobbed their heads off. So, I mean, here you go. I guess that's the evidence. They just murked those dudes. Unless if it was just a few that they let survive, I suppose. I don't know.
Okay, so there was a mass beheading, just as described in the saga, and furthermore, several of the men had been beheaded from the front, just as in the saga. So, once again, what appeared to
I wonder how you can tell the difference. This is just the way the sword strikes.
be complete fiction turns out to have some corroboration in hard fact.
Olaf Haraldson, King of Norway, the man who'd one day become its patron saint, had been a feared Viking before he became a Christian king. In 1029, the Danes, supported by local jarls, drove Olaf into exile. When he and his followers returned the next year to reclaim the throne, they were met by a huge army of hostile pagan farmers. Retreat was not an option for Olaf. On the morning of battle, the restless king rose early and asked his poet, Thormod, to sing to him, to pass the hours before the army gathered.
And Thormod immediately starts to sing the Bjarkamal, which is actually a poem supposed to be sung by Böðvar Bjarki on the morning of the last stand of King Rolf, which we've discussed already.
No matter what, we're gonna die, or we're gonna kill them.
Dunja hana fjadrar, maules vil mögum at vinna elfidi. Vaki eok vaki, vinna hövuð, allir inni utstu adils of sinar. Haar in haarskrepi, rofel skutandi, uitum góðir menn, there is ekki fligja. Vekka útrat vini, neat vivs runum, vek úster höðum, hildar at leiki. The day has come up, the roosters clap their wings, Time for the wretched serfs to do the heavy labour. Wake now, wake, company of friends, all you best ones of Athil's people. Har the hard grip, Rolf the shooter, men of good birth, they who do not flee. I do not wake you to wine, nor the whispers of women. I wake you to the hard sport of Hilda. It seems a strange choice for a poem because it is in a way a suicide poem. It's saying we're all going to get killed. Is this a good morale raiser? Yeah, they're Vikings. They think it's great. Everybody says, super song, just the thing. Let's get started on the battle.
Yeah, because they already think warriors die. When they die, they go to a great place, you know. Die a valuable death, I suppose, you know. Who's that? Where's that? Like Valhalla? Is that where they're going to go?
But the odds were stacked against King Olaf and his men. Thormod's song of brave men rising to face certain death proved a premonition.
The battle is lost. King Olaf is killed fighting in the front rank and is brought down by a series of spear and axe blows. And as you would expect, all his chosen companions, all his bodyguard are killed around him. But Thormod the poet, survives. Not his fault, he just happens to survive. And at the end of the battle, when it's all over, he laments that he has not been allowed to join his king. And at that moment, an arrow comes flying from nowhere and hits him. And the obvious implication is the dead king sent it. He sent it so as to give Thormod his wish that he could join Olaf. And Thormod then composes a poem about his own wound and dies without quite finishing it. He dies on his feet, still reciting the poem, but he doesn't complete the last line, which fortunately is completed for him by a bystander. And the bystander is the teenage Harald Hardrada.
Harald Hardrada grew to become King of Norway and one of the greatest Vikings of all. His adventures led him east to the city of Kiev, where he served at the court of Grand Prince Yaroslav the Wise, then to Constantinople, where he commanded the Varangian Guard of the Byzantine Emperor. As King of Norway, Harald the Hard Ruler was brave, cruel and acquisitive, and in 1066 set his sights on the English throne. But King Harold Godwinson marched north to meet him, moving so rapidly he caught the Vikings off guard at Stamford Bridge.
The thing about the Battle of Stamford Bridge is that Harald Hardrada and his invasion force, they were caught napping. Harold Godwinson marched very quickly up to York and kept on marching through York, and the first thing the Norwegians knew about it was seeing the glint of weapons approaching. But it was a hot day, and the Norwegians had left their heavy equipment, especially their armor and their shields, down on their ships. So they were actually facing an armored force without their armor.
Heedless of the risk, Hardrada advanced into battle at the head of his men. According to the Heimskringla sagas, written by the Icelander Snorri Sturluson, he composed poetry even now.
Framgungum veri fylkegu, brunju löser und blaregjar, Hjalmar skina, hefkat mina, nu ligger struth vart at skipum nedri. Forward we go in formation, without armor against blue steel edges. Helmets shine, I don't have mine. Now our gear lies down with the ships. I think it's quite good, actually, the poem. But Harold, who is a terrible poetic snob, thinks about it for it and says, no, that was too simple. And then he produces another poem in a much more complex and high-class meter and says that's much better.
Hardrada threw himself into the thick of the fighting, unarmoured, wielding his sword with both hands. Fearless and defiant to the end, he died with an English arrow in his throat, alongside most of his army. He is
like, fuck it, ain't no bitch. Fuck that armor.
often called the last Viking.
According to the saga, the Norwegians arrived in 400 ships and the survivors went home in 24. The Anglo-Saxons let them go. That, you might say, put an end to ideas that England could be conquered by Norwegians or Danes or Vikings. The Viking era then was over. Harold Hardrada, you can only say, well,
yeah, that was a sad ending for those guys. But, you know, it's like almost any other tribal people, you know, it ends up ending.
He died like a Viking, making jokes, making poems, lashing out with both hands until he was killed.
But can these poems really be attributed to Harold Hardrada?
I don't see there's any way that the poems could be genuine. After all, who was there to note it down or remember it? Practically none of the Norwegians survived. I expect Snorri Sturluson made them up himself to help his story out. But they're good poems. They express a kind of, not regretful attitude, but it's sort of rueful. Yeah, well, we're not going to win this one. They caught us this time. Oh well, that's the way it goes. We will just have to fight it out. And that strikes me as, again, a characteristic Viking attitude.
The Battle of Stamford Bridge had unintended consequences, paving the way for
That is true, though.
another invader to become King of England.
The Battle of Stamford Bridge was, of course, a catastrophe. It was a catastrophe for the Norwegians, but it was a catastrophe for the English as well, because they took very heavy casualties as well. And 3 weeks after the Battle of Stamford Bridge, they fought the Battle of Hastings against William the Conqueror. And you can't help thinking, if they'd been at full strength, they'd have won.
On the 14th of October 1066, the English army suffered a crushing defeat at Hastings, and Harold Godwinson was killed. England's new king, William the Conqueror, was himself descended from a Viking adventurer. The
Wilhelm the Conqueror. I can't even say that.
Viking Age was at an end. For nearly 3 centuries, Europe had been terrorized by Scandinavian warriors, whose attitude to death
They pretty much ruled the world then, huh? At that time, for those 300 years.
gave them a dangerous edge.
What finally strikes me about the Viking mindset is not so much the defiance in the face of death, that's what you expect heroes to do. It's actually the matter-of-fact attitude, and also the liking for some kind of a joke. You can actually use vulgar words, like Ragnar in the snake pit. You can play dirty tricks, like Vugger with his Pledge of Allegiance. Or you can play practical jokes, like the Jomsviking getting the guy's hands cut off. Or you can nitpick about poetry, like Thormod and Harold Hardrada. All these say, death is coming, it's certain, but actually I'm going to see what I can do to make this memorable. What it makes me think is that when it comes to Vikings, you can kill them, and speaking as an Englishman, we did, over there. But frighten them, that's not going to work. They're always going to come back at you. You're not safe until the very last one of them is dead.
That's how it was for a lot of native tribes too. That's crazy, man. Kind of close, you know, like more of that animalistic type thing to it, you know, almost in almost all tribes, you know, around the world, regardless of who they were. Except we didn't really sail, I suppose, so.
Thank you to Curiosity Stream for sponsoring this video, and to our Patreon supporters for making epic.
All right, well, that was a pretty good one. I'll add down Epic History TV down to the description below. If you guys like their content, please give them a like and subscribe. I I hope you guys enjoyed that one. I know I did. I've been into history stuff lately, not just lately, but all the time, right? But if you got any opinions about this or any cool stories like passed down from family generations, please add that down below. I know people have been doing leaving comments and stuff down below in some of these videos, especially these reaction videos, like the basketball ones. You know, like there's been people that went to school or like training camps for like Pistol Pete and stuff like that, or knew him on a personal level in college and stuff like that. That stuff's that's awesome, you know, and those are pretty cool stories, you know. And hey, man, I'd like to hear them. I do like to hear them. I like to read them and stuff like that too. So don't be afraid to comment down below. And I hope you guys have a great night. And if you guys have anything that you'd like to see be reacted to, history-wise or sports-wise or anything like that, hit me up. Hope you guys have a great one. Peace.